Welcome to the 15th session of the International Relations Congress held by Karadeniz University International Relations Department. My name is Murat, and I will chair this session titled as International Organization in Global and Regional Issues. International organizations are today critical actors in global governance, as you know, and since 1990s, there's a growing literature, especially liberal and constructivism, pays special attention to the international organization, and also realist and critical studies analyzes the same subject from their own perspective. And today, actually, I am happy to be chair of this session because generally, when we look at the Turkish literature, we see a limited studies on international organization. Generally, Turkey's European Union accession process is one of the topics that is well analyzed, most often analyzed, or Turkish relations with NATO is also another mostly analyzed subject. And generally we use the realist theories. But here we have 5 different articles looking at different factors and taking the issue in different theoretical perspectives. So it is happy, and it's promising to see that there's a growing literature in Turkish literature about international organization. So our young researchers and scholars actually improves this literature from their own perspective. So I don't want to waste our participants' time. So I will start this session as soon as possible. But first, I want to clarify some rules about the session. We have 90 minutes, and we have 5 participants. If Burçin Memiş also joins us, we will have 5 participants. So I want to give 15 minutes to each participant, and I also give a small notification when there is 5 minutes or 2 minutes remaining to the end of your time. So at the end, I want to take all the questions. So after all presentations are done, we can switch to the question and answer section. You can ask your questions at the end of the conference, or you can send your questions to me through the chat section of the Zoom application. So again, I want to welcome our participants one more. So let's first start with MehmetOnur Özer and Bekci from Osmaniye Korkut Ata University. Their presentation title is NATO's role in cyber defense, exercises, regulations, education, and channels. And before all these presentations, I actually want to say a couple of words about these topics, especially after Russia planned the 2007 cyber attack against Estonia. Cybersecurity became an important topic in the international security literature. And NATO also gives special attention to this issue, but because it is a recent topic, there was a problem, especially about the application of the cyber security. There's a problem in all around the world, because in general, in cybersecurity, defense is cheaper defense is more expensive than attack. And you cannot put the responsibility easily. Unlike other security issues, you cannot lay responsibility to any other actors in the cybersecurity area. So that's why it's really interesting and contemporary topic. So again, I want to thank our participants to study this issue, because this is really an area that should be analyzed more often. So here, I don't know who is going to present, but MehmetOnur and Bekci, it's your turn. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is MehmetOnur Özer. I'm a lecturer at Osmaniye Korkut Ata University. We will both actually be presenting today. I will take some part of our presentations, and my colleague, Dr. Bekci, is going to be taking some part of it. So let me share my screen first, and then we can get started. All right. I think you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
All right. So cyber defense, cyber security, cyber attacks, cyber intelligence. So there are a lot of terms when it comes to cyber. I would like to start with what actually cyber means and then why is it important, because I think it's really important to give a background about cyber to understand why governments, why international organizations and supranational organizations actually have been taking precautions on cyber defense. So as we all know, cyber threats have become increasingly severe and serious national defense issues over the last 2 decades, and governments have begun taking precautions against cyber threats, like such as founding government institutions to improve cyber capabilities, building new academic cyber defense or cybersecurity programs. They also have started creating new branches in the military forces, while international organizations actually have been building their cyber capabilities in every way possible. But what actually is cyber and why is it important? So we see the term cyber not by itself usually, but we usually see the cyber, as you can see on the screen, with another term like cybersecurity, cybernetics, cyber defense, cyber attacks, cyber terrorism, or cyber intelligence, something like that. But when we look at all these terms, they usually represent computer technologies or information security, storing information, data security, data process or transferring data. So as I mentioned before, when we say cyber, it usually represents computer technologies, particularly internet technology, because when we say actually cyber, the first thing that we understand is internet. But it actually has 2 main components. The first one is the physical component, which is developed by humans, such as like transportation and energy producing systems. And the other component is computational component, such as internet or softwares or programs or applications. So these components create a man-made space called cyberspace. And we can simply say that anything and everything related to physical and computational components of cyber creates this new man-made space. So considering the latest developments on internet technology, computer technology, and smartphone technology, cyberspace has actually has become a really important part of our lives, not only for individuals, but also governments. So we actually teach, we learn, we shop, we do like banking operations through internet in cyberspace. And also with the e-government applications of the governments also started becoming more digitalized. So a possible cyber attack can actually stop our like daily routine. So like, for example, the critical structures of the governments are actually controlled by cyber systems. So imagine having a cyber attack to a nuclear power plant, and we can imagine the effects of this attack. It can be either financial or physical, like it can actually harm people. So NATO also has been taking precautions since 2002. I would like to talk about the background information and the policy. They actually have been done a lot since 2002. I won't be giving every detail because we probably won't have enough time about it. But I would like to start with 2002 because, yeah, as I said before, NATO has been working on enhancing its cyber defense capabilities. But 2002 was the year that the NATO actually first placed cyber defense on the alliance political agenda. When we look at like between 2002 and 2006, we don't actually see a significant act to improve NATO's cyber defense policy. But when it comes to 2007, as the Mr. Chairman actually emphasized at his beginning of speech, the cyber attacks against Estonia's public and private institutions from Russia, actually, it was an awakening point for NATO, and the allied defense ministers agreed that an urgent work was needed in this area. So as a result, NATO approved its first policy on cyber defense in 2008. And after 2008, actually, after NATO approved its first policy on cyber defense in 2008, there was a conflict between Russia and Georgia, as we all remember. And it also showed us that the cyber attacks have a potential to become a major component of conventional warfare, which was actually a really important point for NATO. And in 2010, NATO adopted a new strategic concept at Lisbon Summit, which actually gave North Atlantic Council to develop an in-depth NATO cyber defense policy. So there are two actually most important events happened during this time, which was the first one was in 2014 in Wales Summit. Allies endorsed a new cyber defense policy and approved an action plan that, along with the policy, contributes to the fulfillment of the alliance core tasks. So cyber defense was recognized as part of NATO's core task of collective defense, and allies agreed that international law applies in cyberspace. So what actually that means is that NATO declared that a cyber attack could lead to the invocation of the collective defense clause of NATO's founding treaty, which is Article 5. So that's really important because that basically meant that a cyber attack could actually cause a war against the party that actually organized a cyber attack. So in 2016, NATO actually recognized cyberspace as a new domination. So in 2016, as I said, it was recognized as a domain of operations in addition to air, land and sea, and again as a part of alliance core task. So core task of collective defense. So this recognition does actually not change NATO's mission or mandate, which is defensive. And then we actually have a lot of discussions when it comes to NATO's defensive role in international relations. There's also an important event in 2016 again, because the allies also committed through a cyber defense pledge to enhancing the cyber defenses of their national networks and infrastructures as a matter of priority. So the pledge was taken in the context of Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which is the founding treaty of NATO. During these years, I mean, up until our day, during the summits, NATO emphasized the importance of cyber defense area. So I would like to continue with why is cyber defense essential for NATO? So as I mentioned before, NATO's strategic concept actually depends on three core tasks: collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. And since cyberspace is the new domain of operations, all the allies have to actually show their collective defense and crisis management and cooperative security policies in this area too. In 2016, NATO actually declared its purpose in cyber defense, which I would like to read it. They said, we must be able to operate as effectively in cyberspace as we do in the air, on land, and at the sea to strengthen and support the alliance's overall deterrence and defense posture. So as it happened with the other traditional domains of NATO, cyberspace has actually become has got its importance as it is like the other operations of other domains of operations. So it's essential because cyberspace is a critical geopolitical battleground in the current global context, with the important implications for NATO. And cyber attacks to NATO's infrastructure is constantly increasing, and most of these attacks are state-sponsored because NATO actually has been analyzing the cyber attacks, and what they have seen, the attacks are mostly from Russia and China. So what's essential is actually the most important thing is the intra-alliance cooperation, because they have problems when it comes to cooperating between the member states. And a lack of intra-alliance cooperation leads to inconsistency in policy and practice, and of course, inefficiency. And when we look at the actual situation, so if, like, for example, if an alliance which is devoted to collective defense and cooperative security fails in a collective and cooperative action, so it simply means that the core structure of the alliance becomes irrelevant and dysfunctional. So which is actually really important when it comes to create regulations in NATO cyber defense area. So I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Bekci. She will be talking about the practices and exercises, and then I will be talking about challenges and then conclude the presentation.
You have 5 minutes. I want to remind that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear persons, I would like to outline the practical implementation of these newly adopted policies that my colleague mentioned. So in terms of these political developments and in terms of these developments in practice, it is useful to classify these various activities in different levels. So we have specified 3 different levels, as in political level developments in terms of practical implementation of the policies, military level, operational level, and it is not a level, but outside of the NATO's overall institutional structure. So in political level, in line with the decisions taken in the previous summits or the commitments made by the allies, the establishment of Cyber Defense Committee, which also supports North Atlantic Council, gives a governance to the cyber domain, which was accepted as a specific domain. So in addition, the Cyber Defense Management Board within the Emerging Security Challenges Division was also established to coordinate various activities in cyber domain. So these practical developments are, in a sense, the reflections of NATO's evolving approach in cyber defense in the past 15 years. In military level, after the recognition of cyberspace as a domain, military doctrines and concepts have been reviewed and revised constantly in consideration of the cyber threats. For instance, NATO's concept on cyber defense was first drafted in 2011, and then an action plan was represented by the allies. But this is a long process, a complex process, which I mean incorporating cyber defense issues into doctrines, into concepts, military doctrines and military concepts is a long way. It's long and complex process because even they accepted cyber space as a domain like land, air, and sea. These are traditional domains, but cyber is not a traditional domain. It's totally different than these traditional domains. So this is one of the challenges in terms of practical implementation of the policies. In addition, Cyberspace Operations Center, for example, the establishment of this center is a key actor in developing these military doctrines. But same problem stays here too. So first of all, NATO's doctrinal and capability development over which the member states have the final say. So this is a problem, not only in terms of practical implementation, but also in terms of intra-alliance cooperation, as my colleague mentioned. So this is a problem that we determined, let's say. So these practical developments in the military level are also the reflection of the allied recognition of cyberspace as a domain. In operational level, as I mentioned earlier, cyberspace operation centers, not only in military level, but also in operational level, is a key actor because the center, in support of operational commands, they are monitoring cyberspace, coordinating the operations in cyber with others, land, sea, and maritime. But the problem here is there is no single command structure for cyber operations. So this means cyberspace is a sovereign domain, which significantly relies on member states, that they should volunteer the capability, the capacity, the authority, or the access on behalf of the alliance. So this will not fall under the command and control of a NATO commander, but falls under the command and control of the country that contributes to this in this level. And in line with this argument, some experts also said that states are both willing and capable of cyber operations. Their number is about half dozen. It is not much. In technical level, there are the most important one is NATO Communications and Information Agency. So this agency directly manages some of the allied networks, including NATO Cyber Security Center and NATO Computer Incident Response Capability, which constantly monitors the alliance's networks. And it is the first response in an event of a cyber attack. So it also allows to exchange information in the domain of, in the cyber domain.
Dr. Sorry, but if you conclude the presentation.
Okay, I will conclude. There are, okay, in practical terms, NATO is doing so much inside and outside of the NATO's military command structure or overall structure. The most important one actually cyber exercises, but I can't mention them. So if I may conclude, the alliance is enhancing its cyber defense posture through the use of political means, as well as developing military, operational, and technical capabilities or capacities, both within and outside the alliance. But these are insufficient and failing to reduce or deter further attacks for a variety of reasons. I will now hand you over to my colleague MehmetOnur for these reasons, and thank you for your patience.
I think we're out of time, but I would like to just add a couple of things and then conclude the presentation.
Yeah, shortly, if it is short.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So my colleague actually mentioned about the challenges and what actually hinders applying the cyber defense regulations in NATO. But if we want to conclude, so what should be done in NATO? So reinforcing the related articles in the founding treaty, which is Article 4, is really important. And building a trust among the allies is really important when it comes to cyber defense, because the member states actually don't trust each other, and there is no clear and collective cyber defense command structure in NATO. So building this is really important. And the alliance should encourage the allies to cooperate with the reaching institutional framework. So this is really important because, as I said again, there is no a clear cyber defense command structure in NATO, and NATO has been working on it since 2002, but we can't actually see it happen in practice. Thank you very much for listening us. Sorry about the time, but we can answer the questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, time is an important issue in every conference, as you know. Actually, I will have a question, but I will save it to the end of the session. So now we should, thank you. We should start to the second presentation. Viktorya Erdoğu, graduate student from Marmara University, will present the European Union's impact on Russian civil society. Again, another important issue, because it is like changing Russia within is one of the policies of the United States since the beginning of the Cold War. This was George Kennan offered in his long telegram, and that's what the United States did in the 1980s when they supported the internal forces in Russia to bring the end of the Soviet Union. And today it seems like European Union is playing the same game. So you can start, Viktorya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. I'm not sure about that. Yes. So thank you. And actually, before starting my presentation, I would like to thank academic and administrative staff of Karadeniz Technical University for making this conference happen. Actually, I think my presentation will be more linear and less detailed, but I will focus more on the content, and I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of details of Russian-European Union relationship. But let me start with, as the title of my study is the European Union Impact on Russian Civil Society. The main aim of the study is, as you mentioned, examine the importance of the European Union involvement in domestic issues. I've seen a lot of research done on involvement, Western involvement, specifically United States involvement in domestic political issues in Russia, but I would say the research in European Union is less popular, let's say. So the main research question that I pose with my paper is why does European Union need support civil society in Russia? I think it is important to focus on why question before we actually start doing something. So I think it is also important to note that after the annexation of Crimea and several other issues involving Syria, cyber attacks, and other challenges, European Union and West mainly focus on security issues, security challenges. So they overlook structural system and social challenges that we have in Russia. So I think it will be important to just talk a little bit more briefly about the main challenges of civil society in Russia. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of that, so I think it will be important to just note that in 2011 actually is the starting point when Russian civil society started massive wave of the protests in Moscow. It was as an aftermath of the alleged fraud during the parliamentary elections, and then also in March presidential elections. So it led to the massive protest that it was something unexpected for Kremlin, for a foreign state, but also for people inside of Russia. So it also led to the introduction of several legislative initiatives that restrict freedom of expression and peaceful assembly in Russia. It was done by the state, obviously, and since then this laws progress. But the starting, the turning point was the introduction of July 20 Act. And according to this act, I think it's important to mention that all non-commercial organizations that are accepting foreign aid and that are involved in political activities are required to register as foreign agent. And labeling someone as a foreign agent seems to be a bit obscure, and and it gives a wave that you cannot be trusted. You're the enemy of the state. So that was done in 2012, and since then, nowadays, not only organizations can be labeled as foreign agents, but also individuals can be, and it was successfully done for some journalists and even some social media and mass communication channels. And I think this wave of the protest progressed since 2011, 2012. There were a lot of different themes, let's say, and different. I think in 2014, 15, another wave arose, and then in 2018, another massive protest in Russia regarding the elections was also one of the turning points. And lately, as far as I can understand, the last thing was that the alleged poisoning of Alexei Navalny, who is the prominent critic of Kremlin regime, was the main thing that most of the Western media covered. So, however, when we look on the relations between European Union and Russia, After the annexation of Crimea and like Russian involvement in the eastern Ukraine, Syria, and handful of other issues, the European Union mostly focused on security threats, as I mentioned before. So the security paradigm of Western-Russian relations sort of diverts the attention from domestic issues. So as I mentioned before, there are a lot of structural system and social problems, which basically allows the Russian regime to reconsolidate its power and by means of media, propaganda, restrictive legislation, and also some nationalistic attributes. So I don't want to overwhelm with a lot of details, but I think it is also important to explore more on like what is Russian civil society, because like the term of civil society in Russia is really ambiguous in reality, because when I refer, by the way, to civil society in the context of this study, I mainly focus on non-profit organization, civil society organization, and independent political movements. So the difference between Western and Russian understanding of civil society, as I argue, is that like the general Western outlook is that the democratic countries describe the civil society's role in serving by for balancing power by protecting individuals from state's power. For the Kremlin, the outlook and objectives of the nature of civil society is mainly they take on realistic approach, and they basically refer to civil society as an instrument to gain power in the international agenda. So in this paper, actually, I argue that European Union need to reshape and its view and concentrate more on domestic issues and encourage the establishment of sustainable civil society, which actually will lead to democratization of Russia. I base my idea on methodology. The methodology of the paper is mainly actually neoclassical realism, as I argue that in Russian, from the Russian perspective, the world is still bipolar. So even though before it was United States and Soviet Union, this rivalry, right now it's West against Russia. So this is the main paradigm that they have, and this is the main paradigm that's actually broadcast all around the social media, all around the media, but most of the media channels, they are state-run. So basically, this is how it works. So I think, yeah, what else? When it comes to when I actually access the financial statement of the European financial transparency system through it. So I evaluated different engagement and level of engagement in civil society in Russia. So the numbers, I don't want to confuse everyone with the numbers, but the main funding, the funding mainly goes through European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights. And the number of beneficiaries since 2017 ranges between 2 and 5 organizations. So as you understand, the amount of involvement is really low. And it's very interesting to note that up until 2017, the financial aid through the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights didn't exist at all. So even though the annexation of Crimea happened in 2014, it took 3 years for European Union to actually support civil society in Russia. And I think when it comes to originally the question was why European Union need to support civil society in Russia. There are according to my argument, there are 3 basically reasons. So the main Russian outlook on civil society is based on bipolarity of the international agenda, and it's introduced more and more restrictions. So as it introduced more and more restrictions on the civil society, there is a new trend where more people, especially in the age between 19 and 23, they're willing to immigrate. So it means that they're unhappy with current situation in Russia. So since 2017, where we have 31% of population aged between 19 and 24. 31% wanted to immigrate. Now the number is raising and it's around 60%. So, and also another point, another reason why it's supposed to be like now, the upcoming elections in Russia, I'm talking about presidential elections, and also several scandals that are going all around the world, like for instance, poisoning of Alexei Navalny. So I think this is like mostly the main points of my presentation. I didn't want to make it too long. I don't know if you'll have any questions regarding that. And I feel like I took maybe 10 minutes maximum. So maybe it will allow other people to talk more.
We will save the questions by the end of the conference. I may have a question, especially about the division within the European Union. Especially there are different groups, because as you know, in the European Union and their relations with Russia or their recommendations about relations with Russia is quite different. So, but again, we should save it by the end of the conference. The next presentation is our student from Karadeniz Teknik University, PhD student, Madi, will present the mismatch between the Cameroonian realities and the international policies of the World Health Organization. A post-colonial analysis is a really contemporary issue, because we know that during this pandemic process, World Health Organization did not offer a good policies. There were lots of division within the organization, and there were lots of controversies about its success in the management of this process. So, John Madi, you can actually say you can give a couple of information about this to us. So, John, you can start your presentation. If you have PowerPoint, you can upload it. And thank you, John. Again, if there's a question, we can save it to the end of the conference. So, I think Burçin Memiş is not here, right, Abdullah?
Evet hocam, yok şu an.
So, OnurTepeciklioğlu, researcher doctor from Ege University, will present Turkey's voting behavior in the United Nations General Assembly and overview. And again, if I want to say a couple of words about it, voting behavior in the United Nations General Assembly is quite important, especially when I teach international law class. I'm saying that this is one of the sources that the customs rules of the international law is decided with the voting behavior in the United Nations. Politicians may say different statements, they may give different statements in different times, but generally voting behavior in the United Nations is really static if there's not a quite important change in the foreign policy of a country. So again, this is an interesting topic. Dr. Tepeciklioğlu, Tepeciklioğlu, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Onur-Tepeciklioğlu. I'm from Ege University. Let me share my slides with you first. I don't know if you can see my slides, but I don't see them right now. Actually, I am the last person on earth that haven't used Zoom before, I think, because we are using a different software, so I'm not familiar with this Zoom thing.
It may start in a second. If it doesn't, our assistants can help you.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. It says your screen sharing is paused. Yes. I don't know.
Abdullah, problem nedir? Yani ne yapalım?
Hocam bir kapatayım, ben bir daha tekrar deneyelim.
Tamam.
Tekrar açıp kapayabilir misin acaba?
Okay.
Share kısmına. Tamam.
Hı-hı. Hala aynı şeyi söylüyor. Your screen sharing is paused diyor ama neden olduğunu bilmiyorum.
Bu da hocam start screen sharing diyor ama yani teknoloji işte.
Evet ya, bir de kullanmadım daha önce. Ben mi yapamıyorum acaba diye düşünüyorum. Bir daha tekrar deneyeyim.
Normalde biraz süre geçtikten sonra başlıyor. Evet, başladı şimdi. Şu an ekranımızı
anda
görebiliyoruz.
ana ekranımızı görüyorsunuz herhalde, değil mi?
Evet.
Ekrandan da açabilirsiniz hocam PowerPoint eğer bir sakıncası yoksa.
Ya evet, işte şu anda görüyor musunuz?
Evet, görüyoruz.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry for the delay again. My presentation is named Turkey's Voting Behavior in the United Nations General Assembly. As its name stands, I will try to give you an overview about Turkey's voting behavior. I will not make any bold claims, and I will not make too much cause and effect relationships, because this work is also a spin-off of another work which is under review right now. I and one of my colleagues were studying how Turkey aligns with African countries in the United Nations General Assembly, and I thought that maybe I can produce another study in order to give some quantitative data about how Turkey votes in the United Nations General Assembly. So this is the product of that process. My main aim is here, as I already said, to provide an overview, and I also want to contribute to the growing literature on Turkey's relationship with the United Nations by providing some quantitative data, some overview of the quantitative data. This study is composed of 3 parts. First, very briefly, I will give some general overview of Turkey's votes in the United Nations General Assembly. Then I will move forward and try to analyze Turkey's voting preferences in issue-specific votes. And lastly, I will try to measure Turkey's voting alignment with P5, permanent 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the United Nations General Assembly voting procedures, but I just want to remind you with some basics of it. As you know, each member has 1 vote in the United Nations General Assembly without veto power, and it makes these votings more democratic and inclusive than that of the United Nations Security Council. Votes, as already Murat Hocam said, are not binding, and they're mostly procedural, but still we can draw some insights, because these votes are measurable, and sometimes these votes give strong hints for the political cohesion among different countries. There are 3 types of votes: yes, abstain, and no. But in some cases, countries use abstain votes and abstentions as half no votes or implicit no votes, and researchers treat them as half no's too in some cases. So please keep in mind that when you see the abstain and abstention votes in the graphs. I used United Nations General Assembly raw voting data compiled by Eric Woten to make all the calculations. As I said, there are 6 different categories of votes in this data, which are named as Palestine issue, nuclear weapons and material, arms control and disarmament, human rights, colonialism, and economic development. We will take a closer look how Turkey votes under these categories as well. I have made all calculations with Python programming language. As I already said, this study uses mostly descriptive statistics. I'm not making any inferential statistics in here. I'm not making any bold claims. I'm making as little as possible cause-effect relations, because it needs further research. So this is an ongoing work, actually. I have made, especially in the 3rd part of the study, some periodic analysis of Turkey's voting alignment with P5 countries. I have put them on this slide. Please keep in mind that these periods correspond to some milestones in Turkish domestic political history. And also please note that these UNGA, United Nations General Assembly sessions, typically run from September to December, and some votes typically take place in the following year. And these are the some info about how to treat this data. Lastly, in the 3rd part, I'm defining the political cohesion between Turkey and the P5 countries in terms of a technique called index of voting cohesion, which is defined by R.M. Lippard in 1963. There is a formula of it. It basically takes the identical votes, the number of identical votes, and half number of the votes in which one party voted yes or no, and the other voted abstain. So it takes this data and it multiplies it with 100 and then divides it by the total votes that each party has participated in, and then it reaches a number between 0 and 100. It's in percentages. If we have a number closer to 100%, we can say that these two parties have more political cohesion. If it's closer to zero, obviously, we can say that these two parties have less political cohesion or no political cohesion at all. This is the technique that I use in the third part of this presentation. So this is the first part. So very briefly, this is a distribution of Turkey's votes in the United Nations General Assembly. More than 70% of the votes are yes for Turkey. And this is the case for almost all countries. Most of the countries in the United Nations General Assembly votes yes. And whenever they want to say no, half of the times they are abstaining. Okay, so this abstain and no can be combined in most of the cases. Of course, I haven't checked every vote if these can really be combined, but most of the researchers treat them as equals most of the time. And this is a distribution of issues in the United Nations General Assembly votes. As you can see, more than 19% of the issues, resolutions voted in the United Nations General Assembly are about Palestine issue. It's followed by human rights. It's more than 18%. Again, as you can see, for the other issues, it's almost evenly, except arms control, distributed. So now I want to take a closer look how Turkey voted in these different issues. First, Palestine issue, Turkey consistently votes yes. It's more than 97%, as you can see. Almost all the time, Turkey votes yes to these resolutions. When it comes to nuclear weapons and materials and arms control and disarmament issue, we can see that almost the votes that are cast by Turkey are half yeses and half abstain and no combined, of course. Maybe we can say that Turkey is in a geopolitically hard place. So that's why the votes about these nuclear weapons and material, as well as arms control and disarmament issue, are distributed evenly between yes and almost evenly between yes and abstain and no combined. Human rights issues is another case for Turkey, because the absent votes, or Turkey did not participate the most in the human rights issues votings. It's more than 4%. As you can see, if we go back to the other slides, it's most of the time 1%, and sometimes it's below 1%, as is the case in the Palestine issue. But when it comes to human rights issues, Turkey uses these abstentions as kind of a cover for not saying no or not abstaining, because human rights issues versus sovereignty has always been a sensitive case for Turkey, and Turkey used abstentions mostly in these human rights issues in the United Nations General Assembly. Then we have colonialism issues, mostly yes again, and also economic development issues, Turkey mostly says yes too. The third part, I'm moving fast in order to catch the time. The third part, which I tried to measure the voting cohesion between Turkey and the permanent 5 members of the United Nations Security Council, begins with the United States. As you can read from the graph, especially in the pinnacle of the Cold War, let's say, it was quite high. It was more than 80%, but we can see a downward trend when we get close to present day. If we move to Russia, for example, we can see here a mirrored image. In the beginning, between 1946 and 1960, when the Cold War conditions are quite hard for Turkey, Turkey's voting cohesion with Russia is quite low. It's lower than 25%. But when we come closer to present day, we can see it goes higher. When we look at United Kingdom and France, we see some stable voting cohesion between Turkey and these two countries. And lastly, when we come to China, I have started this from 1973, as China has become, the communist China has become the member of the United Nations Security Council at that date. We see a stable voting cohesion between Turkey and China. Sorry. And lastly, this is my last graph. I tried to measure the voting cohesion with Turkey with these permanent 5 countries in issue-specific votes. United States, again, the voting question between United States and Turkey, again, stands as an interesting case, especially in the Palestine issue. Turkey and United States almost has no voting coalition. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was below 15%. Of course, it's most of the time, United States takes the side of the Israel in these votings, and that's why I think Turkey and United States do not share much common votes in that issue. When we look at again Palestine issue with China, we see the highest voting coalition between Turkey and China. So this is a distribution of Turkey's voting coalition with these permanent 5 countries in issue-specific votes in the United Nations General Assembly. If I jump to conclusions from here, we can say that there's no significant change and fluctuations in Turkey's voting behavior in United Nations General Assembly in different periods. Turkey consistently votes yes, for example, in the Palestine issue. But when it comes to human rights, for example, as I already said, Turkey's sensitive approach to human rights versus sovereignty issue is reflected in its vote preferences. And again, I will repeat myself, but external and internal military and terror threats, I think, have its say in Turkey's voting preferences about disarmament and nuclear weapons issue. When we come to the index of voting cohesion scores, when we come to the pair-wise analysis, we see major terms in this, or fluctuations in the scores. And I think Turkey's domestic politics, as well as international political climate affects Turkey's voting behavior when it comes to pair-wise analysis. And also when we get close to the present day, we see the voting cohesion with Russia and China increases. Maybe this can be explanatory to the axis shift debate, the recent axis shift debate of Turkey's. And except between 1946 and 1960, we can say that Turkey and United States never had a high voting coherency. And lastly, I can say that Turkey and France and United Kingdom have stable and high voting coherence. The last things that I want to say after the conclusion is the limitations of this kind of a study. Of course, obviously, this is a reductionist approach because we are reducing all policy decisions, all political positions of countries to numbers. So it creates a study that may easily overlook the specific issues, even within issue-coded votes. So because it's quite hard to detect particular positions of countries when you reduce all these votes into one single number. I think this is a natural limitation of this study or this kind of studies. And also we should always keep in mind when treating this kind of voting measurements that, especially in the United Nations General Assembly, these votes are procedural most of the times. And voting alignments, for example, I don't know, let's go back here and we can see in between 1981 and between 1985 and 1990, we see a voting coherence between Turkey 80%. But this might be kind of tricky. This might not reflect the actual policy coherence because, as I said, most of the time these votes are procedural and voting alignment scores like the technique that I employed in this study might indicate higher policy coherence than the actual one. So I think this kind of a study should also be supported by some qualitative analysis of these votes as well. Yeah, that's all that I can say about. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Burçin Memiş gelmedi değil mi Abdullah?
Gelmedi hocam.
Tamam, o zaman soru cevabı geçelim. So we are now in the question and answer section. If you have any question, you can ask. You can raise your hand and connect to the system. Or if you don't want to ask in English, if you want to ask Turkish, you can ask and we can translate, because sometimes language makes people shy. I know that. Then now I will use actually my privilege as being chairman to ask a couple of questions. Then first I want to ask to Mr. Özer and Ms. Erdoğu about NATO, because generally when we talk about cyber defense, NATO cyber defense policy, we are talking about Russia. So Russia is seen by the main threat. But recently, when we look at the recent NATO doctrine, it openly said that China, in the longer term, will be the main threat to NATO. But there's an important question here. When it's about Russian threat, then NATO is, can act, because of the historically and traditionally, Russia was seen by the main threat by NATO. But China is a new thing. And if, I want to ask, if NATO has a specific cyber policy against China, and if they have, would it be a problem because it's an out-of-area operation? And when we see that when NATO wanted to involve to the Middle East or to the Africa, this out-of-area operation became controversial issue. And China generally targets the Asia-Pacific countries in the cyber attacks. So here the out-of-area operation questions may come to the may create controversies. So can you explain about that? I mean, what's the NATO's policy against China, especially in terms of cyber defense? Thank you.
Eda, do you want to go or do you want me to go? Can't
Go,
hear you.
please.
Okay. So as far as I know, there is not a specific policy against China's cyber attacks, as far as I know for now. But as you said, it's out of area operations when it comes to China's activities in cyberspace, and it actually basically what happens in here is like this issue actually takes us back to 90s when actually Soviets actually collapsed, and the NATO's existence started being discussed when it comes to its operations. So and with the actual latest events in Afghanistan, looks like China will be actually intervening in the situation a lot, because they have been working on the Asian and Pacific geography, and their cyber threat, their cyber attacks actually will probably keep continuing. And I'm not really sure if NATO itself can come with an approach to China's recent cyber attacks or future cyber attacks, because there's already a controversial issue when it comes to NATO's cyber defense policy, because the members actually have been trying to figure out if they're going to be an offensive or defensive alliance when it comes to cyber defense, and they have been actually discussing about an offense, either they should have an offensive cyber defense policy or defensive cyber defense policy. And as you actually mentioned at the beginning of the of our panel, defensive cyber policies are more actually expensive than offensive cyber policies. So there's also another controversial issue when it comes to that policy. So I don't think there's only like one answer for China's activities in cyberspace when it comes to NATO's reaction. But there is not, as far as I know, I don't know if maybe I missed, but as far as I know, NATO doesn't have a specific policy against China's cyber attacks towards NATO, either NATO's member states or NATO's structure, the main structure of cyber defense.
Thank you. I think it becomes an important issue in the future.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Not now maybe, but in the future. Viktorya, I have a question. Actually, I talk about it a little. The differences within the European Union, especially between the Western Europe and Eastern Europe, about the Russian policy is quite different. So how these deficiencies actually affect the European Union's works on the Russian civil society, and does it create a problem, or they prefer not to talk about it and prefer to follow their own policy? What would you say about it?
Thank you for your question. I think it's like generally the European Union funding and like aid is inconsistent. So it's like regardless if it's what country we're talking about. Okay, there are some countries that are interested in economic growth and like cooperation, but it's more about like economic relations rather than helping civil society of Russia. So I think it's regardless. It's like as my research actually states, the funding, the aid is inconsistent. Mainly the areas that European Union actually gives some funding is aviation and some sort of technical issues, but they overlook the civil society engagement, and regardless of the country. If you're just looking country by country, it's the same issue. They mainly focus on economic development rather than, and also of course like Erasmus Plus program is a part of it, but I don't even count it as engagement in civil society. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I just want to learn that if your research actually look at this issue. Thank you. John, I will have a question for you. You hear me, right? John? Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you. Yes, I'm getting you.
Thank you. Okay, again, contemporary issue. This is the pandemic. So, does Cameroon have a problem with the World Health Organization about the COVID measures? I mean, do they have a contemporary problem with it? Because we know that the World Health Organization is quite really criticized about the response against the pandemic. And I know that several African countries also not happy with the COVID response of the World Health Organization. I know that your research is about some other health crisis, but do you have something to say about the COVID policies of the World Health Organization in Africa and in Cameroon? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Murat. We not only have something to say, have some things in plural to say about the coronavirus response, because we are taking into consideration some measures that have been that are suggested by the World Health Organization that are not taking into consideration our realities, the realities of Africa in general, and the one in Cameroon in particular. I will just take a simple example. In Cameroon, just in order to make a comparison, we have a situation where, just an example of trap zone, you have 5 big hospitals, private and public. Every hospital in trap zone has at least 5 respiratory apparatus to help people to breathe, people that are facing coronavirus. Because when you have coronaviruses, maybe you have problem to breathe. So we should have machines in order to help to assist people in order to breathe. We have this kind of situation here in Cameroon. We were expecting World Health Organization to reinforce the ambulances, reinforce the machine in order to face the coronavirus, but that's not what they're doing. They are rather providing us cars, to just do campaigns. That's why I'm talking about the mismatch. That when we talk about the World Health Organization, where we are expecting them, it's not where they are responding. So when we talk about the coronavirus response, you talk about a simple measure, you want everybody to wash hands, but you don't think about if some water points are available. In fact, I think what World Health Organization is proposing proposing as measure for France should not be implemented in Cameroon. It should be specific to region. It should be specific to the context where this coronavirus, because there is, let us say, scientists are talking about the genetic reaction toward coronavirus, because presently here in Cameroon, we don't use masks. We don't use some measure like in Turkey, and we have like 5 or 10 new cases every day, not like some countries having 1,000, 2,000, something like that. But it's not appropriate. What World Health Organization is, as I say, is proposing to Cameroon, to our government, it's not in accordance with our realities. When we talk about the vaccine, we have our traditional medicines here that normally should have been like promoted. Maybe in Turkey, could have like propose it to the country, like if the World Health Organization would have accepted it. So there is like a mismatch. That's what our title, there is the mismatch between what they are doing and what we really need here in Cameroon.
Thank you. Dr. Tepeciklioğlu, I have a question for you. What surprised me most about your presentation is the work coherence between Turkey and France, because when we look at the United Nations Security Council members, permanent members, we see that I would assume that Turkey would have more misunderstanding with France, especially because of the difference on regional policies in the Middle East. But we see that actually Turkey has more coherence, voting coherence than the with France than the United States. So how can we explain that? I mean, because in the rhetoric, we see that especially today, Erdoğu and French presidents, they always, you know, like in the hostile mood against each other. So is it just a fake hostility, or there's something that we can see about these behaviors?
No, I think that, thank you for the question, by the way. I think this, the answer lies in the nature of the United Nations General Assembly votings. And as I said, most of the time, regional countries or some regions vote blocally in some cases. For example, in the Palestine issue, we see that most of the European countries vote yes when it comes to protecting the Palestinian territory or protecting the Palestinian people. And I think this increases the voting cohesion. I think the most important thing in here, when looking at the pairwise voting cohesion, we should kind of exclude the resolutions that most parties voted yes. We should take a look at the contested resolutions, which I didn't do in here because it would kind of extend the limits of this paper. So this can be a little bit artificial on the one hand, but on the other hand, as I said, we see some regional countries, especially in the Europe, are voting identically in most of the cases. And there is a huge gap between United States voting preferences and other countries. Most of the time, for example, let's say that there's 200 countries participated in a vote and 190 of them votes yes, but United States is usually says no to that resolution. This is, I think, also because of the United States voting preferences, not only Turkey's alignment with with France and the United Kingdom. So I think it's on the one hand interesting, but on the other hand, as I said, European countries usually vote the same. United States take its own position, and Russia and China mostly takes positions against the United States. Because, as I said, United Nations General Assembly votings are not binding, and most of the time, states are showcasing their preferences to the international community there, but they can take some policy actions which are against their votes.
Thank you. Is there any other question from our participants? Or let me check the chat section. I think if there's no other question, that's it. Thank you for participating in our conference. We wish we would host you in Trabzon But you know, it's the pandemic. But the best part is that we can join this conference from anywhere in the country or in the world. For example, right now I am on my yearly vacation. I am not in Trabzon. It's my unofficial maybe dressing workshop. But still, we can connect each other. And these presentations, I think, they are quite interesting because they create more questions than they answer, which is I think show the quality of the papers. They should create more questions. And thank you that we use our time effectively. Actually, we have 10 more minutes, but because of one of our participants was missing. If there's no question, then we can just conclude this session. Again, I want to thank you for your participation, and we wish we can see you in the future in Trabzon, hopefully when the pandemic is over. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
So much. Bye-bye.